They burned her home and left her for dead. But the wolves and the Lakota gave her a new name. Eliza had always been known in her small frontier town as a woman with a quiet strength. She was not loud or boastful, but there was something about her that made people notice. She had a way of moving through life that seemed calm, even when the wind howled and the snow fell hard. Her small home sat on the edge of the town near the forest, where she had cleared a piece of land to plant a small garden and keep a few chickens. It was not much, but it was hers, and she loved it. Every morning she would rise before the sun, wrap herself in a thick woolen shawl, and step outside to check on her animals. The chickens would cluck softly, and she would speak to them as though they understood every word. She cared deeply for every living thing around her, from the trees that sheltered her home to the tiny herbs she grew in neat rows. Eliza's life had not been easy. She had learned early how to take care of herself. Her parents had passed away when she was still a teenager, leaving her to manage the family land alone. At first, the townspeople had offered help, but she had politely refused. She wanted to earn her own way, to prove that she could survive without leaning on anyone. That determination had shaped her into someone who could face hardships that would have frightened many. She knew how to start a fire with damp wood, how to track animals for food, and how to find fresh water in the forest when the streams froze over in winter. One winter, the snow fell earlier than usual. The cold was sharper, biting through layers of clothing and freezing fingertips before they could warm. Still, Eliza continued her routine. She fed her chickens, checked the fence for holes, and stacked firewood so that her home would stay warm through the long nights. Her home was small, made of logs that she had carefully chosen and placed, with a sturdy roof that could hold up under heavy snow. Inside, she kept a modest collection of belongings: a few dishes, some blankets, a chest with her most precious papers and letters, and a small book of poems that she loved to read by the fire. But life in the frontier was never entirely safe. Stories of robberies and attacks traveled quickly through the town, and people warned each other to stay vigilant. Still, Eliza never imagined that danger would come to her doorstep. On one bitterly cold evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows over the snow, she noticed an unusual silence. The wind had died down, and even the birds seemed to have disappeared. A sense of unease settled over her. She closed the door to her home and checked the locks, but the small comfort of a locked door could not chase away the feeling that something was wrong. Then she heard it, a faint crackling sound, like dry wood snapping. At first she thought it was just the firewood settling in the cold, but the sound grew louder, sharper, and closer. Panic rose in her chest. She stepped outside cautiously, peering into the dark. Shadows moved across the snow, and she could make out the shapes of men approaching. They were strangers, their faces hidden beneath scarves and hats, carrying torches that flickered like angry flames. Eliza's heart raced, but she did not panic completely. She had faced danger before, in smaller ways, and she knew that fear could freeze a person more effectively than cold ever could. She retreated back inside and grabbed a heavy iron pan from the kitchen. Her mind raced for a plan, though she knew she was at a disadvantage. The men were too many, and she was alone. Still, she stood her ground, holding the pan like a shield, her eyes fixed on the door as it rattled under the force of their attack. Before she could react further, the door burst open. Flames licked the corners of her home as the men pushed in. Eliza tried to defend herself, swinging the pan with all her strength, but she was quickly overwhelmed. They knocked her down, leaving her unconscious in the snow just outside her burning home. The cold bit into her skin, sharp and unforgiving, but her mind drifted in a haze of pain and confusion. She could hear the crackling of the fire, the shouts of the men, and then Nothing. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Eliza could not tell. When she finally opened her eyes, the world was a blur of white and orange. Her home was gone. Nothing left but a smoldering pile of logs and ashes. Her body ached, bruises forming across her arms and legs. The cold seeped into her bones, making her shiver uncontrollably. Yet, even in this moment of despair, she refused to give in completely. She forced herself to sit up, testing her strength, feeling the snow beneath her hands and the icy wind on her face. She was alone, but she was alive. The realization of survival brought with it a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. She had lost everything she had worked so hard for: her home, her animals, her belongings, but the one thing she still had was her life. And as long as she had that, she thought, there was hope. She struggled to her feet, moving slowly through the snow, leaving a trail of footprints behind her. Each step was painful, but it was a step towards something she could not yet see, a future that seemed impossibly distant, yet somehow necessary. Eliza wandered through the forest, leaning on trees for support, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. The stars began to appear above her, tiny points of light shining through the darkness. She thought of her parents, of the life she had known, and of the lessons they had taught her. One lesson stood out above all others: never give up, no matter how difficult the journey. That thought gave her strength. She pressed on, feeling the wind biting at her cheeks, her fingers numb from the cold, but determined to find shelter. As night fell fully, she stumbled upon a small cave, hidden behind a thicket of trees. It was not much, but it offered protection from the wind and snow. She crawled inside, wrapping herself in the few blankets she had managed to grab before fleeing her home. There in the darkness, she shivered and cried quietly, mourning the life she had lost. But even in her sorrow, a spark of determination remained. She would survive. She did not know how or what the future held, but she knew she could not give up. She had faced hardships before and had come through them, and this would be no different. Hours turned into the long, cold night. Eliza stayed awake as much as she could, listening to the sounds of the forest around her. The howl of a distant wolf made her flinch at first, but then she realized that it was not a threat. It was a reminder that life continued, even in the harshest conditions. She began to feel a strange connection to the wilderness, sensing that it might offer her the help and guidance she needed to survive. By morning, her body ached, but her spirit had strengthened. She knew that she could not remain in the cave forever. She had to move forward to find food, water, and perhaps even other people who could help her. The forest stretched endlessly before her, but she no longer felt entirely afraid. Somehow, the wilderness that had seemed so vast and threatening the night before now felt like a place where she could begin again. It was a chance to rebuild, to find strength she had not yet known she possessed. And so, with the morning light casting pale golden rays over the snow, Eliza took her first cautious steps into the forest. Her heart was heavy with loss, but it also carried a quiet determination. She did not yet know what the future held, but she knew she would face it with courage. The tragedy of losing her home had changed her life forever, but it had not destroyed her. In the cold, in the darkness, and in the silence, Eliza had discovered something important. She was stronger than she had ever imagined, and she would survive, no matter what lay ahead. Eliza had walked for hours through the snowy forest, her body still weak from the injury she had suffered when her home was burned. Every step was painful, and her hands and feet were numb from the cold. Yet she refused to give up. The thought of staying in one place, freezing and alone, frightened her more than the walk itself. She needed to move to find safety, and maybe even food. The forest around her was silent except for the crunch of her boots in the snow and the occasional crack of a branch under a hidden weight. She felt as if she were the only person left in the world. At first, the forest felt hostile and overwhelming. The trees were tall and dense, their branches heavy with snow, making it difficult to see far ahead. Every sound made her startle: the rustle of a small animal in the bushes, the swoop of a bird, the whistle of the wind. But gradually, she began to notice patterns in the wilderness, small signs that indicated life. She saw tracks of deer in the snow and recognized where rabbits had burrowed for shelter. She remembered what her father had taught her long ago about survival: how to read the signs of the land, how to find food, how to avoid danger. One evening, as the sun sank low behind the trees, casting long, cold shadows across the snow, Eliza stumbled upon a clearing. The sight that met her eyes took her breath away. A small pack of wolves was gathered there, their gray and white fur blending into the winter landscape. At first, fear gripped her heart. She had heard stories of wolves attacking humans. She stepped back, thinking of retreating. But then she paused. The wolves did not move toward her. They were calm, alert, but not aggressive. They were watching her with intelligent, curious eyes. Eliza stayed very still, her breath visible in the cold air, her heart pounding. She remembered something her mother had once said: "Animals can sense fear, but they can also sense kindness." Slowly, carefully, she lowered herself to the ground, keeping her movements gentle. She spoke softly, barely above a whisper, telling the wolves that she meant no harm. To her surprise, they did not run. Instead, they observed her with cautious interest, tilting their heads, sniffing the air. Over the next few days, Eliza stayed in the clearing, keeping her distance from the wolves, but watching them closely. She noticed their patterns: how they moved together, how they hunted small animals, and how they took care of one another. The wolves were not mindless predators. They were organized, protective, and intelligent. Eliza began to understand them, seeing in their behavior a kind of family and loyalty she had rarely witnessed in humans. Slowly, a strange bond began to form. She would leave small bits of food, berries or the scraps she could find, and the wolves would accept them without fear. Eliza also learned from the wolves. She observed how they traveled, how they sought shelter, and how they listened to the sounds of the forest. They taught her without words. If a wolf ran silently in a certain direction, she would follow, discovering a hidden stream or a safe place to rest. If they paused and listened, she would also pause, learning to hear the subtle signs of danger that she had once overlooked. By watching them, she began to regain confidence in herself, realizing that the wilderness was not just a threat, but also a teacher. Hunger and exhaustion were constant companions. Eliza had to be clever to survive. She remembered how to make traps for rabbits and small animals, how to fish in the frozen streams, and how to gather edible roots and berries. She also learned which plants could soothe injuries and which could give her energy when she felt weak. It was a slow and difficult process, but every success, no matter how small, strengthened her resolve. She began to feel that maybe, just maybe, she could survive entirely on her own, guided by the lessons of the forest and the silent companionship of the wolves. The nights were the hardest. The cold penetrated her clothing, seeping into her bones. Sometimes she would wake shivering, teeth chattering, feeling the weight of loneliness pressing on her chest. But the wolves remained nearby, their presence comforting in a way that words could not describe. They would curl up near her, or sometimes she would see their glowing eyes watching from the shadows, always alert, always protective. Slowly, a sense of trust developed between them. She named the lead wolf Gray, after its silvery fur and felt a strange sense of belonging whenever it was near. One particularly harsh night, a blizzard swept through the forest. The wind howled like a living thing, and the snow fell in thick, blinding sheets. Eliza huddled under a fallen tree, wrapped in whatever blanket she could find, her body trembling with cold. She feared she might not survive, but then Gray and the pack appeared, moving carefully through the snow. They circled her, nudging her gently, as if to say, "You are not alone." Eliza felt a wave of gratitude and warmth that had nothing to do with the fire she lacked. The wolves stayed with her through the night, shielding her from the worst of the wind. For the first time since her home was destroyed, she felt hope. As the days turned into weeks, Eliza's body grew stronger. Her injuries healed. Her muscles became lean and powerful from walking through deep snow, and her mind grew sharper, alert to every sound and movement around her. She began to move more confidently through the forest, following the wolves on their hunts and learning the rhythm of the land. She discovered hidden groves of berries, frozen streams that still held fish, and caves that offered shelter from storms. She even learned to anticipate the behavior of the wolves, predicting where they would go and what they would do, becoming part of their world without fully losing her own identity. During this time, Eliza also reflected on her past life. The pain of losing her home in the attack she had survived never left her, but she began to see that there was more to life than the safety and comfort she had known. Survival in the wilderness taught her courage, patience, and respect for every living thing. She realized that strength came not from having possessions or a house, but from perseverance, adaptability, and the willingness to keep moving forward, even when everything seemed lost. The wolves, in their quiet way, had shown her that. Eventually, she started to see signs of a new life forming around her. Birds returned to the trees. Deer ventured closer to the edges of the forest, and the small world she had feared became a world she understood. Each day was still a struggle, but it was no longer terrifying. She had discovered a rhythm, a pattern to living that allowed her to anticipate danger and find comfort in small victories. She even began to speak softly to the wolves, telling them her thoughts as she moved through the snow, and they seemed to understand. Gray would sometimes nuzzle her hand, and she felt a bond deeper than anything she had experienced with another human. One morning, as the sun rose over the forest, turning the snow a soft gold, Eliza realized something remarkable. She no longer felt entirely alone. She had survived the attack, the loss, and the bitter cold. She had learned to live with the wolves and to trust in her own abilities. The wilderness, which had once seemed hostile and merciless, had become a teacher, a friend, and a protector. And in that realization she felt a quiet joy, a sense that perhaps life still held beauty and wonder, even after unimaginable tragedy. Eliza did not yet know what the future held, or whether she would ever return to the town she had once called home. But for the first time since that terrible night, she felt a sense of peace. The wolves had become her companions, the forest her sanctuary, and she herself a survivor who had discovered courage, patience, and the strength to endure. Each day, as she moved through the snow, watched the animals, and learned the ways of the land, she grew more certain that she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. She was no longer just a woman who had lost her home. She was a survivor, a part of the wild, and a young woman discovering the power of resilience in ways she had never imagined. And so, with the wind whispering through the trees and the pack of wolves moving silently by her side, Eliza took another step forward, deeper into the forest, ready to face the new world that awaited her. The bond she had formed with the wolves was unspoken but unbreakable, and for the first time since her life had been torn apart, she felt a glimmer of hope. knowing that even in the coldest, darkest places, survival was possible and a new life could begin. After weeks of moving through the forest with the wolves, Eliza felt herself becoming stronger, more aware, and more confident. She had learned to survive on her own, to find food, water, and shelter, and to read the signs of nature like an open book. Yet, despite her growing comfort in the wilderness, there was a part of her that longed for human connection. She had spent so many nights alone, with only the wolves for company, that the idea of seeing other people again felt both frightening and exciting. One crisp morning, while following Gray and the pack through a narrow valley, she spotted something unusual ahead. Smoke rose gently in the distance, curling into the pale blue sky. Her heart leapt with hope. Perhaps it was a small settlement, a farm, or someone who could help her. Yet she also felt a flicker of fear. Would these people welcome her? Or would they see her as an intruder in their land? She had no way of knowing. Still, the thought of human contact was too strong to resist, and she decided to investigate. As she drew closer, Eliza realized that this was not a typical settlement. The people she saw moved with grace and purpose, living in harmony with the land rather than trying to control it. Tents and small dwellings were scattered near a flowing river, and smoke rose from several cooking fires. She could hear the soft sounds of laughter, the rhythmic beating of drums, and the voices of children playing. It was a community unlike any she had known, a place where people seemed connected to one another and to the natural world around them. Eliza approached cautiously, hiding behind trees and observing for a while. The wolves stayed nearby, their presence comforting and protective. She noticed that the people did not seem alarmed by her presence. They were busy with daily tasks, tending to animals, weaving baskets, and teaching children to hunt and fish. The air smelled of smoke, wood, and earth, and it felt warm despite the winter chill. Eliza felt a strange mix of curiosity, hope, and nervousness. She wanted to be accepted, but she also knew she had to approach carefully. Finally, she stepped forward into the clearing. Gray and the pack followed quietly, staying behind her. The people paused, watching her with cautious interest. They could see that she was injured and weary, and there was a kindness in their eyes that made her feel a little less afraid. One woman, older and wise-looking, stepped forward. Her hair was long and dark, and her eyes seemed to see straight into Eliza's heart. She smiled gently and spoke in a language that Eliza did not fully understand, but the tone was welcoming. Eliza tried to respond, explaining with gestures and a few words that she had been alone in the forest, that she had lost her home, and that she needed help. The woman listened patiently, nodding as if she understood. Slowly, others gathered around, offering food, warm blankets, and a place to rest. Eliza could hardly believe her eyes. After so long in the cold and the snow, she felt the warmth of human kindness for the first time in weeks. She allowed herself to relax, tears forming in her eyes as she accepted the help without shame. Over the next several days, the Lakota people, she learned that this was their community, cared for her. They cleaned her wounds, gave her nourishing food, and showed her how to tend to her body after weeks of hardship. Eliza was amazed at their knowledge of the land, their skills in hunting and tracking, and their deep respect for every living creature. She watched as they moved in harmony with one another, teaching the children, preparing for the winter, and honoring the spirits of the forest. It was a life unlike any she had ever known, peaceful, purposeful, and deeply connected to the natural world. At first, Eliza felt awkward and unsure of herself. She had been alone for so long that she did not know how to interact with the community again. But the Lakota people were patient. They taught her their language slowly, showing her that communication was not only about words, but also about gestures, expressions, and listening with the heart. She began to understand their ways, their stories, and their traditions. They welcomed her not as an outsider, but as someone who had survived and shown courage. She felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. The wolves continued to accompany her, though they stayed mostly on the edge of the camp. The Lakota observed them with interest, recognizing the bond that had formed between Eliza and the pack. She explained how the wolves had guided her, protected her, and helped her survive in the forest. The Lakota nodded, impressed but not surprised. They had always known that those who respect and understand animals can form connections that are deeper than words. In their eyes, Eliza's bond with the wolves was a sign of her strength, wisdom, and harmony with nature. As the days passed, Eliza began to participate more actively in the community. She helped prepare food, gather firewood, and teach children about the forest. She learned how to track deer and small animals, how to weave baskets, and how to make simple medicines from plants. The elders shared stories of their ancestors, of bravery, survival, and respect for all living beings. Eliza listened intently, absorbing not only their words but the lessons behind them. She realized that the community was not just a place to stay, it was a school of life, teaching her lessons she could never have learned alone in the forest. Eliza also began to reflect on her past. She remembered the night her home had been destroyed, the fear, the pain, and the loneliness she had endured. But in this community she saw that her suffering had not been in vain. It had taught her resilience, patience, and an ability to connect with the world in a new way. The elders saw these qualities in her as well. Eliza also understood that transformation was not only about surviving the past, but about shaping the future. She worked to ensure that the children learned the lessons of the forest, the importance of respect for all living beings, and the skills needed to live in harmony with nature. She guided young hunters, taught them patience, and encouraged them to observe the world carefully. She shared the lessons she had learned from the wolves, explaining how trust, respect, and understanding could create bonds even between the most unlikely companions. Through her daily actions, her guidance, and her presence, Eliza became a living example of what it meant to live fully, bravely, and wisely. She had learned to balance strength with gentleness, independence with community, and courage with patience. The people, the wolves, and the forest had shaped her, and in turn she shaped them, becoming an integral part of their lives and their stories. As seasons passed, Eliza reflected on her journey. She understood that the tragedy she had endured, the loss of her home, the attack she had survived, the cold and the fear, had not destroyed her, but had prepared her for this new life. The wilderness had taught her resilience. The wolves had taught her trust and companionship. The Lakota had taught her harmony, purpose, and the power of community. And in the quiet moments, when she watched the sun rise over the snow-covered trees or listened to the gentle howl of Gray and the pack, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Eliza's transformation was complete, not just in body or skill, but in spirit. She had become someone who could face the harshest challenges with courage, someone who could teach, guide, and inspire others, and someone who understood the deep connections between all living things. She had found her place in the world, and it was a place where the wilderness, the wolves, and the Lakota community existed together in balance. She had not only survived, she had truly come alive. And as she walked through the forest, the soft crunch of snow beneath her feet and Gray at her side, Eliza knew that her journey was far from over. There would be more lessons to learn, more challenges to face, and more life to experience. But she also knew that whatever lay ahead, she was ready. She had been transformed by loss, wilderness, and community, and she carried the strength, wisdom, and courage to face whatever came next. She was no longer the frightened girl who had fled into the snow. She was a woman of the forest, a companion of wolves, a member of a proud community, and a living example of courage and resilience. Years passed and Eliza thrived in the Lakota community, her life now filled with purpose, respect, and connection. She had learned the ways of the land, the wisdom of the elders, and the deep lessons that came from living in harmony with nature. Each day brought new experiences, new challenges, and new opportunities to grow. She had become a teacher, a guide, and a symbol of courage to everyone around her. The people, the wolves, and the forest had shaped her into someone strong, wise, and deeply connected to the world. Eliza's days were busy but fulfilling. She rose before dawn to gather water from the river, watch the forest awaken, and walk with Gray and the wolf pack. The wolves had become her lifelong companions, always nearby, always alert, yet always gentle and protective. She would follow them on hunting trips, learn from their instincts, and care for them as they had once cared for her. The bond between her and the wolves was unbreakable. Gray, now older but still strong, often walked alongside her, while the younger wolves mirrored their movements, learning the rhythms of the forest and the ways of their human companion. The Lakota children continued to look up to her. She taught them to track animals, recognize edible plants, and move silently through the snow. She showed them how to respect every creature, from the tiniest bird to the largest deer. But more than that, she taught them lessons of courage, patience, and resilience. She told them stories, not of tragedy, but of survival, of hope, and of the strength that comes from facing challenges head-on. The children would listen wide-eyed, inspired by her experiences, and amazed at the connection she had with the wolves and the wilderness. Eliza also became a trusted advisor to the elders. They valued her perspective and experiences, especially the wisdom she had gained from surviving alone in the wilderness. She shared her knowledge of the land, of weather patterns, and of the habits of animals. In turn, the elders continued to teach her deeper lessons about community, responsibility, and the sacred balance of life. Eliza had learned that true strength was not just physical, it was also spiritual and emotional. It was about understanding the world around her, forming bonds, and guiding others with patience and compassion. One winter, much like the one that had once left her shivering and alone, a harsh storm swept through the region. Snow piled high and the wind howled through the trees, making movement difficult. Yet Eliza was prepared. She organized the community to ensure everyone had shelter, food, and warmth. She worked alongside the elders, helping the young and old, guiding them to safety, and even leading the wolves to patrol areas where danger could strike. The storm was fierce, but under her guidance, the community weathered it safely. That night, as she stood by the fire, Gray curled up at her feet. She felt a deep sense of pride. She had turned the fear and weakness of her past into the strength and leadership of the present. Through her actions, Eliza became a living example of courage and perseverance. Travelers from distant towns and communities would occasionally visit, hearing tales of a woman who had survived incredible hardship and now lived in harmony with the wilderness and the Lakota people. They came to learn from her, to witness her bond with the wolves, and to hear her stories. Eliza spoke humbly, never boasting of her accomplishments, but the visitors could not help but be inspired by her resilience and wisdom. She showed them that life could be full of hope and meaning, even after loss and suffering. Eliza's connection to the wolves remained a vital part of her life. She understood them in a way that no one else could. They were her companions, her guides, and her protectors. She learned to read their behavior, to anticipate their movements, and to share in their instincts. The Lakota people respected this connection deeply, recognizing that it was a gift, a bond that bridged the human world and the wild. Gray and the pack often joined the community in daily activities, helping in small ways, warning of danger, or simply walking alongside Eliza as she traveled through the forest. As the seasons continued to change, Eliza also began to reflect more on her past. She thought about the night her home had been burned, the pain of loss, and the moment she had believed she might not survive. But she no longer felt sadness when she remembered. Instead, she felt gratitude for the lessons those hardships had taught her, for the strength they had forced her to find, and for the path that had led her to the wolves, the forest, and the Lakota people. She understood that even the most difficult experiences could shape a person into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Eliza's story became part of the community's legacy. She helped teach future generations not only the skills needed to survive in the wilderness, but also the values of respect, courage, and empathy. She encouraged the young ones to observe the world carefully, to understand the balance of nature, and to honor every living being. Her life showed them that strength was not just about fighting or enduring, but about learning, adapting, and forming bonds with others, human or animal. Her wolves remained constant reminders of the lessons she had learned. Gray, now older and wise, often sat silently at her side, while the younger wolves played and learned from her guidance. Together they moved through the forest with ease, a family united by trust, respect, and understanding. The sight of Eliza with her wolves became familiar to everyone in the community, a symbol of the harmony that could exist between humans and the natural world. Even as time passed and her own hair began to gray, Eliza felt no fear of aging. She had discovered that life's value did not lie in material possessions or wealth, but in connection, purpose, and love. She had a community that respected her, children who looked up to her, and a family of wolves who had shared in her journey. She had survived unimaginable hardship and emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Her name, given by the elders, carried the meaning of her journey, and she wore it with pride, a reminder of who she had become and all she had achieved. Eliza also came to understand that her story was about more than her own life. It was about the resilience of the human spirit, the power of connection, and the lessons that nature could teach if one was willing to listen. She shared this understanding freely, teaching others that courage could be found in the smallest acts, that hope could flourish even in the darkest times, and that family could be found in the most unexpected places. Her journey inspired not only her immediate community, but also those who heard her story from far away. As she grew older, Eliza often sat by the river or under the great trees of the forest, watching Gray and the pack, the children playing nearby and the elders tending to their daily work. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that she had found her place in the world. The hardships of her past had not been forgotten, but they no longer weighed on her heart. Instead, they had shaped her into someone who could guide, protect, and inspire others. She had become a bridge between the human world and the wilderness, a living example of resilience, courage, and harmony. And when Eliza looked at the wolves, moving silently through the snow, she understood something truly remarkable. Life was not just about survival, but about thriving, about learning, teaching, and sharing. The bond she had formed with the wolves, the trust she had built with the Lakota people, and the love she had for the forest had created a life full of meaning. She knew that even after loss, even after fear, and even after hardship, it was possible to find a new path, to create a new family, and to live a life filled with courage, joy, and purpose. Eliza's journey had begun in tragedy, with her home destroyed and her future uncertain. Yet she had emerged from that darkness into a life brighter than she could have imagined. She had survived the wilderness, formed a bond with the wolves, and been welcomed into a community that valued her for who she truly was. She had learned lessons that would guide her for the rest of her life, and she had become a living symbol of resilience, hope, and the power of connection. As the sun set over the forest, casting golden light over the snow, Eliza stood quietly, Gray by her side, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She had learned that the greatest strength came not from fear or possession, but from courage, compassion, and the willingness to embrace life fully, no matter what challenges it presented. She had discovered that even in the harshest, coldest, and loneliest places, there could be warmth, family, and hope. And with that knowledge, she faced the future not with fear, but with confidence, joy, and an unshakable belief in the power of life, love, and resilience. The wilderness had taught her courage, the wolves had taught her trust, and the Lakota had taught her harmony, patience, and the importance of community. Her heart, once heavy with loss, now carried hope, love, and a sense of purpose she had never imagined possible. And so, as winter slowly gave way to the soft hints of spring, Eliza stood by the river with the pack at her side, surrounded by the people who had welcomed her so fully. She thought of her past life, her lost home, and the fear that had once ruled her heart. Now she understood that life had more than one way of teaching a person to survive and to thrive. She had learned that strength comes not just from fighting, but from observing, listening, and accepting help when it is offered. She had discovered that family is not only those who are born to you, but those who care for you, teach you, and walk beside you on your journey. Eliza's journey was far from over. She still had much to learn, many experiences to face, and countless lessons to absorb from the forest, the wolves, and her new community. But she faced the future with confidence, knowing that she was no longer alone. She had found a place where she belonged, a place where her courage and resilience were valued, and a people who had given her not only shelter but also a name that reflected her true spirit. For the first time in her life, Eliza felt truly whole. She had survived tragedy, embraced the wilderness, and found a community that accepted her completely. She had discovered that even after loss, there could be rebirth. Even in the coldest, darkest times, there could be warmth and connection. And even in the loneliest forests, there could be a place where she belonged. And as she walked through the snow with Gray at her side, she felt a quiet certainty. Her life had changed forever, and the journey ahead, though unknown, was one she would face with courage, wisdom, and hope. Eliza's days in the Lakota community became filled with learning, growth, and discovery. What had once been a life of survival, uncertainty, and fear now transformed into a life of purpose and connection. The people welcomed her not just as a visitor, but as someone who belonged, and she slowly began to understand what that truly meant. Each day she rose with the sun, feeling a sense of anticipation she had never experienced before. The forest, which had once seemed so harsh and unyielding, now felt like home, and the people and wolves had become her family. The transformation within her was not sudden, but it was profound. She began to notice changes in herself. Her strength, both physical and mental, had grown immensely. She could move through the forest with the wolves as if she were part of the pack. Her senses were sharper than ever. She could hear the faintest movement in the trees, smell the freshness of water from miles away, and notice the subtle signs of animals approaching. These abilities were a combination of what she had learned alone and what the Lakota had taught her. The elders had shown her how to observe, how to respect the land, and how to understand the rhythms of nature, and now she felt deeply connected to every living thing around her. Eliza also began to participate in the community's daily routines. She helped teach the children about the forest, guiding them in small steps, showing them how to track animals, gather plants, and respect the creatures they encountered. She demonstrated patience she had not known she possessed, answering endless questions and guiding tiny hands through the snow, or teaching them how to move quietly like the wolves. The children loved her, not just because she had survived so much, but because she carried herself with a quiet confidence that inspired trust. Watching her interact with them, the elders saw that she had become more than a survivor. She had become a teacher, a guide, and a symbol of courage and resilience. Hunting trips became a central part of her life, and the wolves continued to accompany her. Gray, the leader of the pack, would often move just ahead, pausing to look back as if ensuring she was following. She had learned to communicate with the wolves in subtle ways, through gestures, eye contact, and quiet sounds. They guided her to places where prey was plentiful, and she in turn respected their space and instincts. Over time, she began to see the wolves not just as animals, but as companions and teachers, showing her how to navigate the wilderness with skill and understanding. Their loyalty and trust were something she had never experienced with humans alone, and it gave her a sense of confidence and calm that no words could express. Eliza's bond with the Lakota people deepened as well. The elders shared stories of their ancestors, recounting tales of bravery, survival, and wisdom passed down through generations. These stories taught lessons about life, the cycles of nature, and the importance of living in harmony with the world around them. Eliza listened carefully, absorbing every word, knowing that these lessons would guide her in ways that her own experience had not. She began to see parallels between the struggles of the past and her own life, realizing that survival and strength were qualities that transcended time, culture, and circumstance. One day the elders approached her with a special task. They asked her to lead a small group of young adults on a trekking journey into the deeper forest. It was a test, a sign that they trusted her not just as a learner, but as a leader. Eliza felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. She remembered the fear and uncertainty that had filled her nights in the snow, the moments when she had thought she might not survive. But now, standing before the elders, with Gray and the wolves nearby, she felt ready. She accepted the task with humility and determination. The journey through the forest was long and challenging. Eliza guided the group carefully, teaching them how to observe the signs of animals, how to move quietly, and how to understand the environment around them. She encouraged them to work together, to respect the land, and to trust in their instincts. At night, they gathered around the fire, sharing stories, and she listened as they spoke of their lives, their hopes, and their dreams. It was a profound experience, one that made her realize how far she had come from the frightened young woman who had fled into the forest months before. She had not only survived, but had grown into someone capable of teaching, leading, and inspiring others. As the weeks turned into months, Eliza also began to embrace the spiritual side of the Lakota way of life. She participated in ceremonies, learned about the significance of the seasons, and understood the importance of gratitude and respect for the earth. The elders taught her that every action, no matter how small, had an impact on the world, and that living in harmony with nature was the greatest form of wisdom. She felt a deep sense of peace as she performed these rituals, sensing a connection between herself, the community, the wolves, and the forest that went beyond words. Her physical transformation was evident as well. Her muscles were lean and strong, hardened by walking through snow, climbing hills, and hunting with precision. Her senses were heightened, her reflexes quick, and her body agile and resilient. But more importantly, her inner transformation was clear. Fear no longer ruled her life. She had learned patience, perseverance, and the power of observation. She had discovered a balance between strength and gentleness, courage and humility. Her heart, once burdened by loss and pain, now carried gratitude, compassion, and a profound sense of belonging. Eliza began to notice that the wolves had become an integral part of the community as well. The Lakota people respected their presence, recognizing that the bond she had formed with them was sacred and meaningful. Gray and the pack would accompany her on daily tasks, sometimes hunting, sometimes simply observing, always present but never interfering. Their presence reminded everyone that humans were not separate from nature, but part of it, and that understanding, respect, and trust could create relationships that transcended species. One morning, while walking along the river with the wolves at her side, Eliza realized that her life had been completely transformed. She thought back to the night her home had been burned, to the cold and the fear, to the moments when she had believed she might not survive. Now she could see that those experiences had shaped her, had given her the skills, resilience, and perspective that allowed her to thrive. The forest was no longer a place of danger, but a teacher and a friend. The wolves were no longer just animals, but companions and guides. The people were no longer strangers, but family. And she herself was no longer just a survivor, but a young woman transformed, capable of love, courage, and leadership. Her new name, given by the elders, now felt completely natural. It was a name that reflected her journey, her courage, and her bond with both the wilderness and the community. When people spoke it aloud, she felt the strength of her new identity, the recognition of her resilience, and the acceptance of her place in the world. She had been given not just a name, but a life full of purpose, connection, and meaning. They began to include her in important discussions, asking her opinion on matters of the camp, and encouraging her to share her experiences. Slowly, she was not just a visitor. She was becoming a respected member of the Lakota people. One evening, as the sun set over the snow-covered river, Eliza stood with the elders near a fire. They spoke to her in their language, words she was beginning to understand more clearly. Then, in a moment she would never forget, they gave her a new name. It was a name that reflected her courage, her journey, and her connection to the wilderness and the wolves. The elders explained that a name was more than a label. It was a recognition of one's path in life and one's spirit. When they spoke the name aloud, Eliza felt a deep sense of belonging and identity. She was no longer just Eliza, the woman who had lost her home. She was someone reborn, someone who had survived, and someone who had found a new family and a new way of life. Over time, Eliza's bond with the community grew even stronger. She learned to anticipate the needs of the camp, to care for the young and the old, and to understand the rhythms of nature as the Lakota did. She became a bridge between the human world and the wild, teaching children to respect animals, to observe the forest carefully, and to honor the lessons of the land. Gray and the wolf pack remained her companions, guiding her when needed and reminding her of the journey that had brought her here. The people no longer feared the wolves. They recognized them as part of Eliza's life and part of the balance she had found. With the new name, new skills, and new community, Eliza began to understand something profound. Survival was not just about living day by day, but about learning, growing, and connecting with others.